Okay, I'm very happy to welcome Brian Eno back to the studios. Brian?
Hello there.
Good afternoon. Let's get you on the... So what are you doing in Los Angeles, people have been asking me?
I was invited to come here to talk to various people and organizations, and that's what I've been doing. I've given a couple of lectures and the odd seminar, had the occasional conversation, and plan to have a few more.
Okay, well, you probably will. It's great to have you back. We haven't spoken in about 5 years, in fact. You have a rather long name. There's more to Brian Eno's name than just Brian Eno. What is it? Would you state it once again for the record?
It's Brian Peter George St. Jean le Baptiste de la Salle Eno.
So where did that come from? England and France? Is it a Norman name?
No, it comes from being a Catholic, or having been brought up a Catholic. Because when you're Catholic, you get to choose your confirmation saint, and you normally choose the saint whose feast day you were born on. Mine happened to be St. Jean le Baptiste de la Salle.
We're going to start our music selection as we sort of get it together here with a very beautiful piece from John Cage. That's very different than some of his experimental pieces. It may be a little bit less conceptual, and it's called In a Landscape. This is from 1948. We're sort of both choosing music, and I know that John Cage, at some point, you must have read Silence or thought about his conception. Did he affect your thinking?
Oh yes, a great deal. I can probably say that I would not have become a musician had it not been for John Cage, because he gave the license to a whole generation of people to think that there was possible a kind of music that didn't involve classical skills and or even technical skills of being able to play an instrument. So he was very important. The other thing I think that was very important about him was making a strong linkage between the act of making music and the philosophical act of deciding what you were doing on the planet anyway. So he turned music into a kind of practice of some kind, a spiritual practice perhaps, or certainly a philosophical one. Yes, he was very important.
We're going to listen to a version of In a Landscape, a performance called Daughters of the Lonesome Isle. John Cage's music performed on piano and prepared piano by Margaret Lang Tan. It's our first selection here in the Brian Eno Hour at Café L.A. music of John Cage, performed by Margaret Lang-Tan. The album is called Daughters from the Lonesome Isle. The song is called In a Landscape. Brian Eno is with us here at Café L.A., and I didn't know that you recorded that piece on a...
Well, I had a record label in the 70s called Obscure Records, which was a brave and ultimately foolhardy attempt to convince the pop industry that this kind of music might be interesting to them. And one of the things we released was several of those Cage pieces from that period. And that particular one was actually played by Carla Bley on my version of the record. And there were a couple of other pieces that were sung by Robert Wyatt. In fact, Cage pieces sung by Robert Wyatt. They were very, very beautiful too, with his very high sort of countertenor voice.
I'm amazed that those haven't been reissued.
There are a lot of amazing things in the world of music, I think.
The Obscure label also gave Gavin Bryars his start with the original Titanic record.
That's right.
As well as that beautiful Homages record.
That was the first... That was our first release. In fact, in a way, I started the label so I could release that particular piece of music, or those two pieces, the Sinking of the Titanic and Jesus' Blood. And yeah, we really put together the whole thing so I could launch that record, really. I loved that piece of music.
I want to take you back to...
Not too far, I hope.
Yeah, you might be mad.
There's a long way.
I know, but I want to take you back a little bit before we move to our next piece of music, which is Donna Summer. About Dick and Dee Dee and the Raycon of Singers. We pulled something from the Raycon of Singers, just for the heck of it, but we couldn't find Mountains High by Dick and Dee Dee. But those are the pieces that you heard something there, didn't you, when you first heard them?
It's a shame you can't find Dick and Dee Dee.
I know. It's been 5 years and we should have it.
Yes. It's one of those things that I'm surprised isn't regarded as more of a classic. You know. Well, I guess what I heard there was the attempt to create new sound worlds in music, which has been a sort of a key characteristic of the development of pop music, I think. The idea that what was being done wasn't only to do with music in the classical sense, to do with the arrangement of notes and rhythms and so on, but was actually to do with the creation of worlds of sound. You know, if you think of a lot of the defining great moments of pop music, they're actually almost everything to do with sound and very little to do with text or narrative or actually music in the normal sense. Think of, say, Good Vibrations, for instance. What do you remember? Who knows what that song is about, really? What you remember is a landscape of some kind of sound, you know.
And a weird instrument called the theremin.
A weird sound, exactly.
I remember the first time I heard Donna Summer was after I'd been living in France, and I had been robbed that day, and I didn't have any money, and someone took me to a club where I wanted to get drunk and forget my problems, and they played Love to Love You Baby. Mm-hmm. And what I noticed is that, first of all, it was extremely long, and it was sort of trance-inducing.
Yes.
And people soon after that thought of disco being anything but trance-inducing, but there was something about the length of it, for one thing, and that one piece just went on and on and on and on, and of course the production values.
Yes, I mean, I remember very clearly the day I first heard I Feel Love. I was working in the studio on one of my own albums at the time. I can't remember whether it was Before and After Science. It probably was. And I heard this. I was walking down the street and I heard it coming from a record shop, and I almost gave up completely at that point. I thought this is quite a long way ahead of what I'm doing. I loved the combination of the machine-like quality of the rhythms there, because they were very post-Kraftwerk mechanical rhythms, Giorgio Moroder type beats, plus her really beautiful gospel-y singing over the top. I thought the contrast was so touching. And I went back in and listened to my stuff, and it didn't sound so good. So that record had a big influence on me, because I pulled apart a lot of things after hearing that and redid them.
Do you think if you had been born in, say, 1918 and instead of 30 years later, you would producing music have been as interesting?
I'm sure I wouldn't have been doing it. No, I think I probably would have been more interested in cinema, actually, or theatre, for instance. Those were exciting arts at that time. But I suppose, actually, I would have been a painter, which was what I trained to be anyway. And for me, the most interesting period of painting in this century was the period from about 1903 to 1925, I guess. It was a very exciting period. I've just been living in Russia, where, of course, you have in St. Petersburg, where you have the very well-known Hermitage Museum, which has one of the great collections of the world, but also the less well-known Russian Museum, which is all Russian painting from about the 10th century. And there are whole schools of painting that you've never heard of, beautifully, fully evolved styles and philosophies of painting that have never really been shown over here.
I thought everything was mostly iconography during that period.
No, it was pretty iconographic up until about the mid-17th century. But after that, it really started opening up. And there were, of course, a lot of rich new merchants, because Russia was such a big empire, and they were able to finance a very vigorous art community, which often consisted of painting them or their rather plump wives in some extremely beautiful paintings from that period. But then by the end of the 19th century, there were a lot of Russian. They weren't really impressionists, actually, because I don't think they were directly influenced by or related to the French, but they were very, very interested in light. And they approached the problem of painting light in really original ways that I've never seen anywhere else. Painters like Kunji and Kustodiev and so on, who dealt with landscape in a very strange, dreamlike way. It's kind of painting that didn't really mature over here for another 30 years or so, I think.
Our guest is Brian Eno this last hour here at Café L.A. We're going to turn to the Vangelis John Anderson piece, State of Independence, next sung by Donna Summer. You're listening to Café L.A. that was part of a TV series in Japan called Legacy of the Future, music by Toru Takamitsu, which I thought you might like, Brian.
Really beautiful. Beautiful. And a very nice crossfade out of the Donna Summer, I have to say. Mm-hmm. Not done by me.
You had sort of a this is the last question that I'll ask that goes back a long ways, but you were recuperating in London. You were hit by a cab, mm-hmm. and you were recuperating, and you had sort of a small in small letters a listening epiphany while listening to a banged up stereo that affected your later thinking.
Yes, well, what happened was I couldn't move. I was immobilized, and somebody came to visit me, and I said, "We'll put a record on while you leave." She put on a record of harp music, 17th century harp music. And because the stereo was broken and only one side worked, and anyway, she hadn't turned it up very loud, and it was raining very heavily outside, all I could hear really were the few loudest points of this record, which stood out like the tops of icebergs through the sound of the rain. And I was initially a bit annoyed about this, but I couldn't do anything to change it, and suddenly I found I was enjoying listening to music in this way, and that I wanted to hear a kind of music that didn't try to assert itself over the environment that it was in, and which would try to become a part of that environment, really. And I guess from that experience, more than anything else, I arrived at the idea of ambient music.
Tell us a little bit about your first ambient record was called Music for Airports, and it was based on an installation that you did at LaGuardia, and then of course the CD. Tell us a little bit about that.
Actually, it was the other way around. The installation followed the record. I was sitting in, I think it was Dusseldorf or Cologne airport one morning. Beautiful sunny day, and there's a rather lovely airport actually built by the father of one of the members of Kraftwerk. Lovely architecture, and as usual in these situations, dreadful music. And I sat there being mildly annoyed by the music they were playing, and started to think, well, actually, what kind of music should one play at an airport, or could one play? And I started to think that you could actually make a special kind of music for situations like this, a kind of music that didn't attempt to be reassuring, for instance. Because anything played in airports has to continually keep saying, "Don't worry, planes never crash. Don't worry, everything's going to be fine. Don't worry, it's all working just right." So it's all hopelessly cheerful, which of course makes you even more nervous, since the cassette player normally doesn't play properly anyway. So I started to think of making a kind of music that tried to make you accept the situation you were in and not worry so much about the thought that you might disappear. Also, I wanted to make a music that people could make announcements over, and it wouldn't destroy the music. So that meant making a music that had no strong narrative structure, that relied on being a kind of immersive sound rather than being some kind of a musical story that most music is.
It's interesting because a stroke of genius or madness must have hit you, because the concept of Muzak was something that people scoffed at and laughed at in the 50s and 60s. Mm-hmm. And I understand that Muzak was originally formed to play in various stores with subliminal messages like "Don't steal" inside them that you couldn't hear.
Don't steal, but do buy.
Isn't that true?
I know they did work with subliminal material for a while, but what they spent more time doing was trying to, and what they still attempt to do, is to try to make use of the natural peaks and troughs in people's attention. So in a workspace, people normally dip a little bit after lunch quite reasonably. So what happens in the Muzak there is that it gets brighter and the tempo goes up a little bit. So the idea is that you will increase people's productivity by evening them out in that way. What I thought would be nice to do is exactly the opposite, to celebrate the fact that people feel different at different times of day and make different kinds of music for those times. It's sort of an anti-Muzak move, I think, really.
Next, we could play a number of things. Next, I could listen to this great piece that actually I played earlier, but we could play it again. What the heck? Of Cameron with an Indian ensemble, or we could play something from Jim White. We also have the Alan Lomax, the prison songs. It might be interesting to hear something from that.
Yeah, I'm interested in hearing anything at the moment that doesn't sound like it was made on a computer. So there's a very good example of something that sounds a very long way from that.
Okay, well, let's listen to something called Rosie. I know that, boy, these guys sing while you hear them chopping the rocks at Angola State Penitentiary. This stuff has just been reissued, and it's amazing stuff by one of the great musicologists that went out and recorded this stuff in the 1940s. So this is CB and Axe Gang. The song is called Rosie. It's from Alan Lomax, The Prison Songs, Volume 1. This is on Rounder. Brian Eno is our guest here, final hour of Café L.A.
Be my woman, girl, I be your man. Be my woman, girl, I be your man. Be my woman, girl, I be your man. Get this on this dollar in your hand, Lord, in your hand. Get this on this dollar in your hand. Stick to the promise, girl, that you made me. Stick to the promise, girl, that you made me. Stick to the promise, girl, that you made me. But God married, tell her I go free. I go free, Lord, I go free. But God married, tell her I go free. Well, Rosie, well, Rosie, when she walks, she realizes when she walks, she realizes is that enough to worry? Is that enough to worry? Well, Rosie, well, Rosie, be my woman, girl, be your man. Be my woman, girl, be your man. Be my woman, girl, be your man. Get this on this dollar in your hand. Well, Rosie, well, Rosie, and she walks, she realizes when she walks, she realizes ain't that enough to worry?
یاری بده یاری بده گرم است یاری بده من تشنه‌ام آب کجاست یاری بده حکایتی به گوش من بگو
An album by I believe he's Belgian guitarist who's worked, I think he's a gypsy guitarist as well, working here on oud and the bouzouki, another Middle Eastern instrument. His name is Thierry Robin. The album, I think, is called, what is it called, Brian?
The Naked Gaze, I think.
The Naked Gaze.
In English.
Apparently
Le Regard Nu.
Brian Eno is here with us at Café L.A. We have a few more minutes left. Brian, when a group like Prodigy debuts at number one, is the music new or is it all hype or what? Did you have a reaction to that record? Like other people have had a reaction? Did you have a chance to even listen to it?
I don't know it.
Okay.
I know their earlier record, so I don't know this new one.
Do you think that today's audience tastes are a little different than our generation, at least those of us who came up in the late 60s and 70s?
Well, one of the kind of appalling things is that in many ways it's the same. There's so much recycling now of 60s soul and cheesy music from the early 70s and so on, that it's rather depressing. I think, God, are they going to be the anthems for this generation as well? So when it is different, I like it. Yeah. However, I'm not madly excited by a lot of the things I hear. Partly because I sort of feel, yes, well, we knew that was possible, and indeed somebody's now proven that it was, and good. So what?
You produced a lot of records, of course, the Joshua Tree and the other U2 records, Harold Budd, Martha and the Muffins, and so many others. Do you have sort of a favorite, one that you were particularly happy with and still maybe listen to?
No. Well, I don't really know. I change my opinion about the things I've done all the time, so I couldn't really nominate a favorite.
Has there been a record that struck you lately that you've enjoyed? And how do you buy records? Do you listen to the radio?
Well, when I was living in Russia, I listened to the radio, which is actually very interesting because the radio stations are nowhere near as formatted as they are over here. So on any given channel, you hear just the strangest things put next to each other, and I like that. I like listening to radio when you have absolutely no idea what the next record is going to be about. So I heard quite a few things I liked, and one thing I think is really promising is Russian rap music. There was quite a lot of that around, and I could very rarely decipher what the name of the bands were. But there's something. I think rap is a very interesting international music form in that it doesn't sound stupid, whoever does it. I've always thought that rock music sung by French people was almost entirely embarrassing, as done by Italians. It just didn't seem like the right music for the language, just like opera in English sounds grotesque. Translations of Italian operas into English sound ugly and awkward. But rap, on the other hand, which is a music that takes its rhythms from language and builds around language, works very, very well in a lot of different languages. I've heard Russian, Finnish, Lithuanian, Latvian, Japanese, Italian, French, German rap. They all sound interesting to me. In fact, I think some of the new hybrids of rap music are actually proving to be very interesting. I like this guy Coolio. Perhaps people would think that's rather middle of the road taste, but I really like what he's doing, mixing together new ways of putting melodies into music, melodies on top of text rather than melodies and text at the same time.
Was MTV in Russia? Was there a Russian MTV, or?
I think there is something like that, and I think it's pretty unpredictable as well. It's I didn't have a television there, so I didn't actually see much of what went on like that.
Do you think MTV has been good for the music in the 15, 16 years that it's been on the air, or do you think that it's had a detrimental effect?
Well, I think what it's done is to make music into a much more visual form. So, when people make records now, they are actually making musical decisions also on the basis of how that will translate into a visual decision of some kind. I think that's quite nice. I like watching MTV sometimes. I despise it at other times, but I feel that way about a lot of things. It's not the death of music that people thought, or at least not in the sense that they thought. What it has done, of course, is broadened the field quite a lot, so that it's actually it's quite hard for anybody to be abreast of everything that is going on at the moment. So we are now all specialists, whereas at the time that you were talking about earlier, the 60s and 70s, most people knew exactly what records everybody ought to listen to that month. You know, there was a kind of a canon that everybody knew about. Well, there isn't that anymore. It's a more confused and in some ways more fluid situation than that now.
One other question, sort of a three-part question. Do you recall I asked you this question once before about what was maybe the most violent record the music you've ever heard, and I think you talked about Steel Pan. Today I'd like to ask you about maybe the most peaceful and the most romantic music, in your own opinion.
The most romantic. I'd have to think about that for a minute. Do you want to play another record in the meantime? And I'll see if I can think of something, and maybe you've got it here.
Okay. Well, while we're listening to this, we'll listen to the flamenco singer who died at age 43, Camarón de la Isla, going back to the roots of flamenco, which is gypsy music and the music of India, from this new collection that Viola Galloway sent me. I think you're going to like this, and we'll come back and chat for a minute, and then we're done.
Okay.
Brian Eno is here with us at Café L.A. I remember Brian reading in school Walter Pater, who I'm sure you had to read as an art student in England. he said that all art aspires to the condition of music. Do you agree with that?
Well, I think he was right at that when he said that, but actually I think now a lot of music is aspiring to the condition of painting. You know, a lot of what interested me musically was trying to make things that I could only describe as the equivalent of late abstraction, you know, the paintings of Rothko or Barnett Newman, people like that, things that stood as static musical conditions. So I think I was trying to do the opposite, but at the time he was talking about, when art was trying to break free from what they saw as the restriction of figuration, they looked to music as a truly abstract art, which it is. It's not that referential. So yes, I don't think he's right now.
Well, we've been delighted having the last hour with you. Thanks for taking time out of your busy schedule here to come in and visit us.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Okay, bye.
Bye-bye.